On July 13th, 1995, in American Fort Canyon, Utah, 18-year-old Cody Richens was hiking through a thick patch of aspen trees when he stumbled across a tree that had a name carved into it that sent fear surging through him. What happened the second time he ventured there was absolutely terrifying, almost taking a deadly turn. A year later, something happened that was both mysterious and disturbing. This is a story he told in an interview with the local newspaper a month after the incident in 1995. What happened up in those mountains haunts me every time I close my eyes. I haven't ventured back in the mountains since, and not sure I ever will. Most people don't believe what I'm about to tell you, but I don't really care. I've given people directions to the tree to see for themselves. I'd been hiking in the mountains in American Fort Canyon since I was about 8, but this was my first time in this particular area. My plan was to hike in far and camp for about a week, but I wanted to check the area out first. This was also going to be a solo trip, as I liked being by myself. I'd gotten a few tips of some possible places to go check out, so I made plans to head up on July 13th to check out a specific area, which was a Thursday. The dirt road to the area I'd be going on was long and rough, but I had an old, beat-up 1979 Ford Bronco that'd go anywhere. The area I planned on hiking is down in a valley between two big mountains, Mount Mahogany and Mount Timpanogos. It's steep, dark, and very thick, the perfect place I liked camping. After a long, bumpy drive, I finally made it to the spot I'd have to park. It was about 7 a.m. as I grabbed my backpack and laced up my boots. I remember a feeling of excitement going through me, as I always loved checking out new places to hike and camp. I'd have to start from the top of a hill and hike down into the valley, then turn right, heading into large, thick patches of aspens and pines. As I hiked down, the sun was just beginning to come over the top of Mount Timpanogos. I looked at the valley in front of me and thought how thick and dark the trees were I'd be hiking in. Every time I went hiking alone, I always had a sense of fear, but that fear was something I actually liked, as weird as that sounds. When I made it to the bottom, I made a slight right turn that would take me straight into the thick trees. When I made it to the edge of the aspens, I slowed way down and started creeping along, as I knew the animals would still be out feeding, and seeing them was part of why I liked hiking into far places. After I'd been hiking for a while, I had to stop to tighten my boots back up. As I stood up, I noticed a name carved into an aspen tree just to my left. I stood there stunned, as the hairs on my arm stood on end. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I've been in the mountains enough times and seen enough man-made carvings in aspens to know this one had been there for quite some time, a decade or two for sure. I stood there just staring at the name because I knew the detailed history of this person and knew this could absolutely be genuine. A few minutes later, I decided to continue hiking as I had a lot of ground I wanted to cover and wanted to be back to my Bronco before dark. The rest of the day was uneventful, except for running into several small herds of elk. I plan on coming up the following week though, and several more times over the summer. I needed to find places I could get water daily before I actually planned on staying in there for a week. I made it back to my Bronco just as the sun was going behind the mountains to the west. As I drove along that bumpy road in the dark, I realized I'd forgotten all about the name I'd seen carved into the tree. It was now coming back though. As I started thinking about it, flashes of what he'd done came flooding into my mind, because I knew in grim detail what he'd done. I shook my head as I drove, trying to put it out of my mind. The following week went by quickly as I worked for my father during the summers at his business, and he kept me plenty busy. I planned on going back on Saturday, July 22nd. The night before, I gathered the things I'd need and decided to wake up about 5 a.m. I hit my alarm as it went off early Saturday morning. I rolled out of bed, put on my hiking clothes, and piled into my old Bronco. I loved leaving early in the morning before the sun rose. Nobody on the road, only me and my thoughts. I stopped at the local gas station and got a cup of coffee before heading to the mouth of the canyon that'd lead me to the area. I'd brought along my camera this time in case I ran into any more elk and hopefully a bear. Up to that point, I'd only seen one bear in the wild with my own eyes. I arrived at the parking spot about the same time as the previous week, around 7 a.m. I was sleepy, so I reclined my seat back and took a quick 15-minute nap before leaving. It was starting to warm up some as I stepped out of my Bronco and made my way to the rear to grab my boots and backpack. I remember looking around thinking, I'm the only one here. This is sweet. I loved having the whole mountain to myself. There's something about thinking you're the last man alive, as that's how I always felt when I was in the middle of nowhere. The mountains are usually teeming with people camping or on four-wheelers, especially on the weekends, so I was a bit surprised. Once I finished lacing up my boots, I slung on my backpack and took off down the hill, following the same path I'd taken the week before. When I came to the edge of the aspens, I paused for a moment, looking around to see if there were any animals, but there were none. I remember thinking it was awfully quiet, no birds chirping, wind blowing, nothing but silence. I continued walking through the aspens but slowed down as I went, as I was on the lookout for any elk or bears. After hiking for a while, I nearly dropped the camera I'd been holding, as I was stunned by what I saw. There, before me, was the tree with the name carved on it. Only this time, blood was oozing from it. I stood there, horrified. What the hell is going on, I thought. I instantly got a pit in my stomach like I'd been punched in the gut. I started doing a 360, looking all around me, thinking someone must be doing this and they're watching me. I stood there for several minutes when I finally calmed down enough to think, I need to take a picture of this or no one will believe me. As I raised my camera to take a picture, I felt something tap my shoulder from behind. I spun around to see who it was, but there was no one. Suddenly, something hit me from behind, sending me to the ground, my face hitting the dirt. I was then lifted high into the air as my limbs were each being pulled in different directions. I fought like hell to break free of whatever had a hold of me, but couldn't. Suddenly, I was dropped to the ground, which hurt like hell. I struggled getting up as I screamed aloud, "What in God's holy name is going on?" Fear and instinct took over as I started running away from the tree as fast as I could. I kept going until I came to the thick patch of pines, which at this point I was about to throw up and had to stop to catch my breath. As I stood there hunched over trying not to vomit, I heard something running behind me. I stood up and turned around just in time to see what looked like a man as I was hit in the face with something. I swear on my mother's life, it was him. I remember hitting the ground then blacking out. The next thing I remember was waking up with my head throbbing something awful. Once I came to, I just laid there deciding what to do next. I knew I needed to get up and try making it back to the Bronco. As I was about to get up, I heard a man fairly close behind me whispering, and what sounded like him walking around in a circle. I could faintly make out what he was saying. "We are your sons, we are your husbands, we are everywhere, and there will be more of your children dead tomorrow." My body tensed up as terror surged through me. I started thinking about my family as a thought I was going to die raced through my mind. I dared not move as I laid there. Suddenly, everything stopped. In that moment, I closed my eyes and braced myself for death. "I love you, Mom and Dad," I whispered to myself. My entire body was frozen stiff as I fully expected to get hit again. After what seemed like forever, nothing happened. Nothing but silence as I heard my heart beating loudly, trying to jump out of my chest. A few more minutes went by before I decided to open my eyes and have a look around. As I opened my eyes, I could see the sun's rays coming through the pines. I moved my head so I could look behind me to see if someone was there, but there was no one, as I breathed a sigh of relief. I rolled over and got to my knees as I looked all around me, making sure he wasn't hiding somewhere, watching me. The trees were thick, but he wasn't anywhere I could see, so I got to my feet as I put my hand on a branch to steady myself. My head was still throbbing and I was dizzy. Being stuck in that deep, dark canyon all night was not something I wanted, but the thought of something that scared me far more than that was, he's still out there. I could tell by where the sun was at, it was now late afternoon. Hours must have passed. I had no idea where I was. I knew where west was, but if I headed west, it would take me deeper into the trees and to another mountain range. Heading east, though, would take me down into a really steep, nasty canyon. I needed to head southeast to be exact, but with no compass, I had a 50-50 chance. My head also hurt like hell, which clouded my judgment. After a bit, I made a decision and started walking. It was hard to walk being as dizzy as I was, but I just kept pushing myself. I walked for a while through the thick pines when I noticed it was starting to get dark and I saw no end in sight. That's when I started panicking. My breathing suddenly got fast and I thought I was going to hyperventilate and pass out. I knew I needed to sit down and calm myself, so I sat up against a large pine. Right as I sat down, something grabbed me, pulling me into the air. Whatever it was, it had a tight hold on me. I struggled to break free, but it felt like I was wrapped tightly in a blanket. I levitated in the air for a while in the darkness. All I could do was stare up at the stars that were coming out. I grew up in a very religious household, so I had my ideas of what was happening, but still couldn't fathom it was happening to me. It's odd, but as I lay there suspended in midair, I was actually calm and thinking clearly. I thought if it's my time, then it's my time. I'm not sure how long I was levitating when suddenly I fell to the ground and could move again. As I stood up, something hit me in the face, sending me to the ground. It took me a minute, but once I stood up, I was immediately knocked back down again. This went on several more times before I decided to stay on the ground. As I laid there, I was beginning to wonder if I was truly going to die. Suddenly, I heard horrific shrieking of what sounded like multiple women screaming for help. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard. At first, it was faint, but it started getting closer and closer until it was within a few feet of me. I covered my ears, closed my eyes, and braced for something horrible to happen. But the shrieking immediately stopped when it got right next to me. It was then I started praying for help and wished like hell I was back home. Thoughts of my family and friends went through my mind as I laid face down on the cold ground. I must have fallen asleep because I was awoken the next day to the sun hitting my face. I remember I was freezing as I sat up trying to get my bearings. The events that happened the day before came flooding into my mind. I looked all around and realized I had no idea where I was at. I'd always been taught to stay put when you're lost in the mountains, so I decided to remain where I was at. By midday, my stomach was hurting something awful, and I was dying of thirst. I decided to walk a short distance in a circle to see if I could find some water. It didn't take long before I found a good-sized pond not too far from where I'd slept. I knew drinking this water was going to give me the runs later, but I didn't care. I was too thirsty to care at that point. Once I finished drinking, I went back to the spot I'd spent the night, sat there, and thought about a lot of things that day. As evening approached, I remember feeling off. I felt as if I was not myself anymore. I can't explain it. I spent another night in that spot before I heard search and rescue calling my name the following morning. I yelled back at them as I heard them approaching on horses. Once they found me, I was put on a horse and taken out, then down to the American Fork Hospital where I spent the night. Cody was then asked by the interviewer whose name was carved on the tree. His response was, "It was Ted Bundy." Over the next year, nothing happened to Cody. He went about his life working for his father until July 13th, 1 year later to the day. Cody's parents reported he went to bed the night before, but the following morning, he, along with his Bronco, were gone. They called his friends along with anyone else they could think of, but no one had seen him. A few days later, his Bronco was found in the mountains at the exact spot he was at the year before. A search party was organized, and the search for Cody was on. The following day, 2 rescuers came upon the tree. The name on the tree made the rescuers stop in their tracks, but what was on the name left them horrified. Blood had been smeared across Ted Bundy's name. It was oozing out of the name and appeared to be fresh. The blood was later tested and was not Cody's. Rescuers scoured the area for 10 days before giving up. Cody was never found. A photograph was taken of the tree, but the picture's whereabouts remain unknown to this day. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.